Hello and welcome to the TelecomTV Summit on Open RAN. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and coming up now is our discussion on the system integration challenge of Open RAN. Now, the complexity of integration could present an obstacle to wider Open RAN adoption, or at least the adoption of systems from multiple vendors. Will operators still rely on their primary vendor partners to supply a de facto turnkey system? Will specialist integrators play a pivotal role? Or will operators look to do this work themselves? Well, let's find out what our guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Carlos Fernandes, who is Vice President, Lead Partner Manager at Deutsche Telekom and also NGMN ODIN Project Lead. Chris Simcoe, Director, Network Applications Architecture at BT. Keith Johnson, President of Parallel Wireless. And Pallav Paliwal, who is Chief Architect, Network Cloud Leader at IBM. Hello everyone, very good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part today. Now, thanks to Open RAN, many more of us now have a far greater insight into the complexities of the RAN and the many individual components that go into it. First of all, can I ask, has the RAN always been this complex, or has Open RAN added to the complexity? Keith?
Thanks for the question, Guy. I think that the RAN has always been a complicated system. It's solving a big and complicated problem. And I think that this complexity often was obscured or hidden. And in so doing, it was doing us a little bit of a disservice. What Open RAN's done is it's really opened that box so that we can see what's going on inside. And while the transparency that comes may start as startling and may lead us to believe that it's more complicated, in fact, it's not. And if you look a little deeper, it holds the promise of a pretty dramatic simplification of the RAN, because now we have a set of components that have to be well understood and interoperable across a set of vendors. And so if the question is Open RAN inherently more complicated than other approaches to RAN? I think the answer has to be no. And I think it sets the stage for a future where there's a much simplified approach.
Thanks, Keith. Chris, has the RAN always been this complex? It's just that we're seeing it more now.
Bit of that, I think, it's definitely always been complex. I think with Open RAN, you're taking things which may have been quite internal before within an implementation of the functionality of the RAN, splitting them apart. Sometimes that leads to additional complexity. And I think initially we're seeing that it is very much more complex, but I think what it will do over time, we see this again and again in technology cycles, where things are initially complex, but as Keith says, over time it leads to simplifications. I think what we'll find is that new actors or new entrants to the market will find unique ways to address things that otherwise we wouldn't have seen if we didn't have Open RAN and didn't split things apart. So I think ultimately that will lead to some simplification, but I think it'll be a while before we get there.
Thanks, Chris. Carlos, can I just quickly ask you, because you're heavily involved in the disaggregation of network elements as part of the work you're doing with NGMN. Is it a case that complexity has always been there, but what we're doing now is we're just shining more of a light on it, perhaps?
I think what we are observing is that the complexity has been now further opened, in the sense that more interfaces are being made available to the ecosystem, and therefore allowing more players to come in and develop their own solutions. And that means that some of the things that mentioned before were a bit hidden are now exposed, and they need to be proven, they need to be tested, and they have to have the proper interoperability and security. And that fundamental work in terms of architecture and interface specification is, of course, super important. But the impact that we observe from NGMN side is mainly in the operating model. How the operators, given the new capabilities that are given to them, embed them in their own processes. How do they fully exploit them in the best possible way, in the faster time to market way? And therefore, it's not only a technology complexity, I would say, but the focus of NGMN is really around how do we ensure that we are still able to deliver excellent customer service while dealing with those additional network elements or capabilities, and not disrupting or leveraging as much as we can on the processes for operating model that we have inside the operators.
Thank you, Carlos. And just to wrap up this initial question, Pallav, if I could turn to you, what do you see in Open RAN? Do you see added complexity? Can you any extra thoughts there about the complexity of our radio access networks?
Yeah, so as Carlos mentioned, the complexity is not in ORAN actually. The complexity is basically how the integration has to be handled. The more testings needs to be taken care. The entire life cycle management of the ORAN needs to be simplified so that the deployments, which are happening on the scale needs to be addressed. So the more automation, in the testing phase, we try to convince, from the ORAN perspective, the more better is for the ORAN simplification.
Great, thanks everybody. Moving on then, has this transparency also resulted in more scrutiny of the interfaces, of the interoperability between components? And has this turned up any surprises here? Chris?
Not sure any surprises. I think we find always with these standardization of interfaces, you end up with compromises very much so. And I think what we'll see over time, and we've seen a bit of this already, sort of pre-Open RAN implementations leading to much more strict adherence to standards. But I think over time, some of the complexities that we talked about just now will need to be addressed in different ways. So I think what we'll find is various vendors interoperating in ways that become sort of market accepted practices potentially, rather than strictly adhering to some of the compromise that we'll see in the standards. And we've seen that time and time again, and I think it's something that will emerge again as we take these solutions forward.
Thanks, Chris. Carlos, is there still work to be done here as we scrutinize these interfaces and look at the interoperability between different elements?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of work being developed, for example, at the ORAN Alliance when it comes to interface specification. What we have observed so far is that multiple capabilities are being defined, and there is the need to actually validate inter-vendor systems in the best possible way. I mean, the choices are really a lot. And all of them, yes, they open and contribute to make sure that the interfaces is up and running, but up and running is not enough. We need performance, and we need the right delivery capabilities being developed there. One thing I would like to highlight is that several operators, and even also coming from the vendor side, or vendor ecosystem parts, are developing the so-called Open Telecommunication Integration Labs, or the OTIC labs. And this allows those systems to be tested as early as possible, validate and certify specific solutions, and then accelerate the roadmap of Open RAN and ORAN capabilities that the operators can leverage on. Again, from NGMN stand, this is a work that we see as fundamental, a key Lego box that needs to happen, and then the work on top regarding the operating model has to be defined as well.
Thanks, Carlos. Now we're seeing Rakuten, for example, take the step into becoming a vendor. So you've got an operator there who's also becoming a vendor, an integrator through its Symphony spin-off. Does a move like this signal that the system integration challenges of Open RAN are just so complex that they are beyond the ability of most telcos and tier 2, tier 3 telcos, and indeed a lot of vendors, and that the most experienced integrators are actually those telcos that have gone through the process themselves? Pallav, do you see the early adopter telcos like Rakuten as being perhaps the most experienced in systems integration for Open RAN?
So if you see, Rakuten has started, so early this kind of integration, and they have basically experienced, so early into the ORAN stage. And there are a lot of learnings, which has to be taken, from such deployments. But if you talk about the complexity and all those things, I don't think basically that's the right direction, basically, that all the vendors, or maybe, you think from the SI perspective is feasible. So you take up an example, basically, that most of these stacks which are currently disaggregated, what exactly we are learning from such deployments, which Rakuten has done. The most important part is basically the automation. So if you have to basically plan your cloud, if you have to basically say that, okay, I am planning the cloud, I'm planning the applications, then basically I am moving towards how the configuration of those hardwares needs to be done, how the designs needs to be automated. Then, you go into the stage when the automation of that entire cloud needs to be done. then particularly your application lands on into the cloud part and says that, okay, the next part is let's basically have the application readiness and try to have the complete testing of the applications there. Then the last stage is basically about how you execute the data use cases. So entire stitch, if you see along into this lifecycle management, it needs to be automated and there should be a specific software. So you take up an example, like we are working basically, we as a IBM is working basically on CP4NA, which is Cloud Paks for Network Automation. Okay, and this is enabling mostly the operators and also the SIs so that they can basically automate their planning, automate their deployment stuff, the designing stuff basically, and the entire application complexity, which has to be taken, from the multi-specific vendor applications, which has to be landed on the same cloud. So it is basically, about how the learnings needs to be addressed, but more and more, the SIs needs to be more powerful in basically deploying these cloud into a automated fashion, which is basically called zero touch provisioning.
Thank you, Pallav. Carlos, we are always learning, aren't we? And it's a very early days with deployment of Open RAN. So it stands to reason, I guess, that those telcos who've gone through the process first and have got the experience have got a lot of knowledge to impart.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And of course, if you are one of the leading of the pack, certainly you will see the challenges and the obstacles first, but as well you will be the first to reap the benefits of the solutions once you are able to master them. And again, this model that you mentioned is indeed very interesting. It is posing almost ready to consume type of package of solutions that, as mentioned before, as a foundation, a very, very good foundation on automation and leverage specific certified technical capabilities to ensure that the deployments are faster and competitive. Now, one thing that we have observed, this is one option that we have seen, but in terms of the work inside NGMN, what we have seen so far is one common denominator emerges in all the discussions we have. Operators will have to embrace more responsibility, both on the integration and on the operation of the network going forward. And this requires, a step change as well from the mindset, from the skills, and of course, early solutions, just as the one that you described, help to cement that vision and ensure that we are doing the right steps, but more work needs to be done.
Thanks, Carlos. Well, this leads us quite nicely onto another question, a very related question here, and that's we're also hearing that the best approach here might be a balance, a mixture of in-house telco integration with further work done by lead vendor partners or specialist integrators. Obviously, the exact percentages change depending on the strengths of the individual telco. Chris, maybe I could come to you first on this one. Do you see telcos, and in your case BT, do you see telcos taking more of the or doing more of the legwork when it comes to systems integration for Open RAN?
Yeah, I think you have to, but I think it will depend very much on the deployment scenario, the use case, and I don't think it's as much as the skill set as the appetite. We're constantly looking at the things we do ourselves, the things we get other integrators or vendors to do on our behalf. But in other areas where we've moved things to the cloud, for instance, where we've done virtualization of other elements of the network, it's just a matter of how much you want to take on, how much you want to skill up. But it's not just down to the skills, it's actually just your overall approach and whether you accept that that is something you want to do. Where are your strengths to play? There are other aspects to it as well. And, some mobile operators, for instance, BT, we're very much a fixed and a mobile operator. So the structure and the skills we have are very different from some operators who are strictly just mobile. For instance, when it comes to deployment, we will have a large distributed field force because we deal with lots of exchange buildings, COs. So there's a lot of additional skills that some telcos have or some MNOs have that others don't. So it very much will be based, I think, on the appetite you have and where you think you can really optimize the solutions based on the skills you're willing to take on. I don't think it's just down to what you currently have. It's just something new that needs to be done.
Thanks, Chris. Carlos, you're nodding there to what Chris was saying. Is a lot of this down to the appetite of individual telcos?
I mean, let's face it, this is indeed the biggest question, and actually one of the reasons of what the panel discussion that we are having here today. And thank you for the opportunity to have a go at it. Finding the right approach to embrace this paradigm shift of moving from traditional RAN to disaggregated RAN and software-based solutions is the core essence of the work being done at the ODIN program, operating disaggregated networks at NGMN. So we mentioned before increased complexity, integration efforts, additional costs, and no operator that we have spoken to wants to jeopardize at any point in time the quality of the service, which is rightfully demanded by their customers. So what we are doing at NGMN is to capture what is common in terms of the challenges that are observed from the operators that are contributing to the work, as well as very unique characteristics that they pose. And these boil down to, as mentioned before, it can be the competitive landscape and the time to market of the solutions. It can be the geographical presence. It can be the scale of that particular operator, their internal skills and know-how, the internal automation capabilities, so on and so forth. So we're trying to map all of those characteristics and ensure that we have the best approach or blueprint that each operator, based on that specific set of conditions, can adopt to successfully make that transition. We believe the industry should develop, once we have collected all that input, the industry should develop accordingly and supply to the operators options in that space or solutions in that space that tackle, is it a technical a tool or systems that needs to be developed? Is it a skill development required? Is it customized integration services? All of which relate to impacting how the operators are designed to operate internally and make them sustainable and future-proof.
Thank you, Carlos. And Keith, getting the integration balance right sounds simple on paper, but as we've heard, there's a lot of different factors involved here. So it's not as easy as it looks, is it?
No, it's incredibly complicated. And a lot of the discussion, because this is what you hit first, is about how to deal with this now transparent complexity and how to make sure that we establish best practices and patterns and blueprints. And that's absolutely vital. But I also don't want to lose track of why would we do this at all? And, we need to use this word innovation to help describe that. We're not just trying to do Open RAN because it moves the integration problems around a little bit. We're trying to do it because it allows every operator to innovate in the way in which they take services, combine them. What did they choose to deploy? What did they choose not to deploy? If you go to one of 2 or 3 big integrators, then it's natural to expect that what you're going to their standardized best practices for how to deploy a RAN. That's what they do, and they do that because it drives down their costs. But the patterns and the practices you just heard about sound to me like opportunities for innovation. And I think that when you talk about niche integrators as well, that's yet again opportunities for innovation. And so I think that as Open RAN goes through this process of maturation, and we're no longer wondering how to do the basics because we have 5 or 10 years of history, behind us, then I think at that point we can then start worrying less about how to protect the bottom and more how to create upside at the top. And I don't want that message to be lost. The point of all this is really innovation in the service of the operator, ultimately in the service of the end customer. I think integrators are a central piece of that picture.
Thank you, Keith. Pallav, as Keith was saying there, innovation is a key factor. Although this panel has been titled, the challenges of systems integration, there are also opportunities that we can leverage for Open RAN, aren't there?
Yeah. So it's absolutely right. As what Keith mentioned, the innovation is required. Innovation is much required in terms of what SIs are practicing actually today in terms of a lot of manual interventions between the different phases. So what is important is how the important phases are getting, automated. A brutal automation needs to be done. Okay. And all the life cycle management needs to be connected at each and every, next phase. This is very important to understand, because if you say, where the complexity lies starting with the 5G core, or maybe you take up an example of 4G, how the deployments are happening. Initially, it was very challenging, but when people realize that, okay, there is a need of the automation and there is a lot of assurance which needs to be connected, same has to be applied in the ORAN, because your orchestration layer, your assurance layer needs to be interconnected, and whatever the automation package basically you are trying to basically foresee, that needs to be connected in such a fashion that whenever you get a trigger from the assurance, it gives you the full flexibility of deciding whether a scale in or scale out needs to be done or not. So such kind of innovations needs to be bring in the day-to use cases, and these can be just co-created. It's not just a master SI playing a role. It has to be pushed basically from the application side, and CSPs needs to drive that, okay, what are the REST keys we are going to define for successfully launching such packages where your day-to operations or managed operation services environment needs to be taken care well.
Thanks, Pallav. Well, there's a tendency to think of systems integration as perhaps one big project, one clear step. But should this work be broken down and spread across a bigger time frame and amongst more players, perhaps? Chris, in other words, with Open RAN, should we be starting integration earlier with perhaps pre-integrating various components at various stages?
Yeah, I mean, the way I like to think of it is looking at it as a platform approach. So I'm really, if we look at taking the ecosystems that are forming the marketplace, you'll see different vendors that are already working together. So if you take a platform approach to it and you select more of a solution provider, someone who has skin in the game, there are opportunities there where you're working with vendors that are already effectively partners, have been working together for quite a while. So if you take on board a few use cases to apply that to, you're effectively working from a solution that may already have worked together before. And learning from it on that basis, then you can take the approach that Rakuten's done. Working with it over a couple of years, they've managed to pull apart the pieces that they really can optimize from it. So that's a way of sort of getting some of that pre-integration done, is taking more of an alliance or an ecosystem of vendors, and then over time pulling out the pieces that are critical to you to optimize. And then, whether you want to swap out vendors, when you want to optimize the build of your servers, different elements of that, and approaching it in that way, rather than, as you say, one just big SI or integration project.
Thanks, Chris. And Carlos, does this platform approach we've just heard about from Chris here, does that resonate with the work you're doing and with NGMN and its members?
That's correct. Again, as mentioned, anything that can facilitate or ease the path that the operators are facing to adopt these technologies is very much welcome. And I mentioned a couple of examples like the OTIC labs that are out there and that can be used to, as mentioned, pre-validate solutions and certify them. But I also want to highlight the point made before around innovation. Collaboration is key in this area. There's, again, because we open up the ecosystem, there are multiple players coming into the game scene, and they need to collaborate with each other. If they do so, they can leverage a lot on the community of developments that comes on the new architecture pieces that we have being deployed and available in ORAN, like the RIG controller. And then on top of that, new services can be designed and foster innovation accordingly. So yes, we need a bit of, I will not say standard, but a bit more pre-validated solutions. All the vendors have been working together in the past. It's just a question that they need to make their contributions as well in the Open RAN scenario, which is just a new implementation. And from that, make the environment available, as mentioned, to have more innovation and more services being deployed.
Thanks, Carlos. And Keith, does the work that we're seeing at these various open labs and the pre-integration work, is that an important contributor to easing the systems integration challenges of Open RAN?
It's absolutely vital. Every time you look at something that was monolithic and you break it apart, then eventually you have to put it back together, hopefully in a novel, differentiated, innovative way. Hopefully you find people that have found some sort of new approach to a problem, and you can inject that innovation by itself into the overall solution. And no matter what industry you look at, there's words for this. People talk about shifting less, test early and often. whatever it may be, you have to get the pieces together as early as possible in the life cycle. I think these labs are one central piece of that picture. I also think every vendor should be doing it on their own, like within their own lab, not necessarily only at these shared locations. And I also think that there's a future where you're going to see the operators, every operator is going to host some micro version of this for their own, where all their vendors will be able to come together in a seamless, fluid, relatively continuous way to do this validation, right? The sooner you discover a problem, the faster you can come together to fix it, and the more confidence you can have when you roll that out to some sort of production environment. So I see these efforts that are led by, certain members of the community, supported by the community, supported by the operators, the vendors. I think they're absolutely pivotal.
Thanks, Keith. As you say, the sooner you identify a problem, sooner you can rectify it and roll it out. Which brings us to a final question I'd like to ask, and that is how important is speed of deployment here? Pallav, is this an ideal use case for telcos to contract with dedicated system integrators for Open RAN in order to get deployments out faster?
Exactly, yeah, because when you talk about the faster deployments, it's much more better, it's much more matters basically into the Open RAN journey. Because when you're talking about the radio and when you're talking about the core, the scale, the number of sites will be quite high actually. And if you see in the current scenario, to deploy one RAN site, it took basically months to deliver that. Okay, and if you talk about the scale, most of the operators today struggle that how much time basically I am going to take to deploy this number of sites. So from the virtualization technology we are bringing into the Open RAN, obviously we are lowering down those CapEx, OpEx problems, but it's important to also understand that we are moving much more faster deployment of the clouds, onboarding of the applications, much more faster, testings needs to be done. And that's where, you need completely a style and different innovation into the type of ORAN journey there.
Thanks, Pallav. Chris, is speed of deployment at this stage a factor?
It can be. I guess it depends how you think of speed of deployment. Is actually the deployment or speed of getting ready to deploy, which I think is probably mostly what we've been talking about here. I think they're both a factor, but I think again, looking at different telcos or different mobile operators, we all have different capabilities. So I think when you're looking to deploy, you really need to look at the entire set of capabilities that you already have. And I think the deployment model you choose and your ability to do that on speed and whether SIs play a part of that depends on, if you're talking about macro, if you're talking about in-building, where you may already have capabilities as an operator for your own field force to do things like cabling and building and things like that. So there's different types of use cases where we'll be using Open RAN, and I think the options for deploying them are very different in those different scenarios. But I do think in the deployment, some of the additional things we need to look at are things like supply chain and repairs and returns. Some of the things that traditionally sometimes they're outsourced to large vendors. When we're dealing with large vendors, sometimes they're not. And depending on the capabilities that you have built up, again, as a telco, you potentially need to look for solutions in this area if you're dealing with multiple newer or smaller vendors that aren't providing those services. So whether SIs have a role to play in that part of deployment as well is something that really needs to be looked at in order to speed up and maintain the speed of deployment.
Thank you for that, Chris. And we will indeed look more closely at the supply chain issues as more and more telcos approach commercial rollout of Open RAN, and we'll be doing that in our next summit. That's a great point to draw our discussion to a close for today. Thanks very much to all of you for participating and sharing your views. If you're watching this on day 2 of our TelecomTV Summit on Open RAN, then please send us any questions you have and we'll look to answer them in our live after show program later today. And please don't forget to take part in our online poll if you haven't yet done so. All of the programs from the first 2 days of this summit are available to view online here at TelecomTV, and we'll be back tomorrow with more discussions for you. Until then, thanks for watching and goodbye.